Dirtbag! Hey, ugly one. Keep away from mirrors. You don't need any more bad luck.
Seriously?
Hey, dirtbag. Thrill me.
What do you want?
Just checking you got a handle on your new name.
So if you've been following me for the past few years, then you know I'm a pretty big Resident Evil fan. Whether I've done episodes on it, brought it up in comparison to something, or it's made it into my top 10 list, whether it be classic survival horror to the action to the in-between, I tend to not to know when to shut the fuck up about it. But I mean, hey, when it's your favorite gaming franchise of all time, I mean, it's kinda hard not to, right? I might not be able to wear that badge of fanboy honor by saying I've been with the series day one, since I only got into Resident Evil properly in 2007-2008 thanks to Umbrella Chronicles, but it wasn't long before I became a Resident Evil junkie. The overarching story interested me, the characters I thought was fun. Even though at first glance at the box for Umbrella Chronicles I pegged Wesker as probably an annoying pompous douche, little did I know he was one of gaming's most popular villains. Oops. But after I played the hell out of that Wii title, I combed and researched what else was out there, and before long I was playing the other games in the series and falling in love with them too. Except this wasn't my first experience with the series. Oh no, it still left its mark on me back in the early 2000s thanks to a certain little N64 port called Resident Evil 2. I didn't get to see much of it since I was sleeping over at my older cousin's house, and Ryan had only rented it. Not to mention I was probably too young to really grasp its gameplay even if I did have a chance to try it. But the name Resident Evil, and that scene of Claire being approached by a licker, it stuck with me ever since. Why it took me 8 to 9 years to finally decide to play it? Beats the hell out of me, and I'm still kicking myself for it to this day, but I guess playing at 16 is better than nothing. Yet it goes to show just how important Resident Evil 2 was, where even when I had no time put into it, it still infected my hobby. Though, the game doesn't really need an introduction. It was the title that made Resident Evil a household name, and cemented it as one of the most popular franchises in all of gaming. And whenever the question is brought up asking what's the best game in the series, well, the answer is usually the Resident Evil 1 Remake, Resident Evil 4, and you guessed it, Resident Evil 2. For me, this is something I always found really impressive. The idea that, too, a PS1 game, mind you, is able to stand up with a game that's considered by many to be one of, if not the best remake ever made. And a game that redefined an entire genre of a section of shooters, that is quite literally still used as the foundation for just about every third-person shooter today. I mean, hell, not to jump ahead, but the game I'm talking about today still uses the over-the-shoulder style. So to me, for a game to be considered as good as those two, again, that's impressive. But of course, with how hard Remake knocked it out of the park in terms of critical acclaim back in 2002, and Resident Evil 4 basically promoting the series to AAA status, the question fans would soon be asking, when are we going to get a remake of Resident Evil 2? With how amazing the first remake was, surely they'd have plans to remake the other PS1 games, right? Right? So fans would wait, and wait, and wait, and wait, until the question, when is it going to happen, became, is it going to happen? And for a while, it didn't feel like it was ever going to become a reality. Hell, I came to the party late and I still had to endure a decade of waiting. But as we learned over the years, while Remake did amazingly well on a critical level, financially, it didn't do as well. Hell, Resident Evil as a series was on its last legs financially. If 4 didn't sell, then the series was going to be retired. But we obviously know how that went. So as 4 blew up, a rift had started to form as well. Resident Evil wasn't that B-series survival horror game anymore. Now there was action. And whether Pierce classic fans like it or not, action is kind of what was needed for a while, since as much as they would like to say it ruined Resident Evil, in reality it saved it from a fate like Darkstalkers and Dino Crisis, who hasn't seen a new title for well over a decade now. So the series started heading down that direction, with 5 being more action oriented, to Resident Evil 6 just being balls to the wall ridiculous with its action. You know, the series had come a long way from its humble beginnings. Now, while I always stand by Resident Evil 5 as being one of the best in the series, or at least being a great game in its own right if you don't want to consider it a Resident Evil game, and while 6 being a big step back was still an okay action co-op game, most fans had gotten tired of the excessive Michael Bay action. And despite Capcom announcing at the time that they didn't see a survival horror take being profitable for them anymore, 6, while sold a lot, didn't perform as well as the company wanted it to. So the series was kind of in limbo for a while, with the Revelation spin-off series being the only thing that had any real success. during these few years, a Resident Evil 2 remake was considered wishful thinking. Not to mention, some people didn't even want it to happen anymore since they felt they couldn't trust Capcom at doing it justice at this point. But we soon reached November 27th, 2014, and we once again come back to the Resident Evil 1 remake, which was remastered for current-gen systems with new higher resolution graphics and improvements. And once again, while not as big of a jump between the PS1 and GameCube, the improvements put Resident Evil 1 and a year later Resident Evil 0 back into the spotlight, and in people's minds again. So much so that the Resident Evil 1 remake remastered, fuck that's weird to say, broke sales records. It became PlayStation Network's biggest launch game at the time, as well as Capcom's fastest selling digital game across North America and Europe. And keep in mind, this was for a 12-year-old game at the time. So it was proven that yes, survival horror can still be profitable, and that people still wanted these kinds of games. So here we are a decade later, and that question popped up again. Are you guys gonna make the Resident Evil 2 remake? You know, we'd kinda like it if it happened, you know. Just saying. Then on August 12th, 2015, a short little video appeared that said it was directed at all Resident Evil fans. And then it finally happened. I don't think Resident Evil fans were as happy as they ever been to see broken English as much as we did that day. We do it. It finally happened. What was once a pipe dream was becoming reality. There was nothing to show since it had clearly just been greenlighted recently, but just knowing that finally Resident Evil 2 was being remade was all we needed to lose our minds. But during that development period, it was about 3 years of silence, and we didn't have a clue on how things were going to turn out. Was it going to be static camera angles and tank controls, essentially the same kind of remake we got in Resident Evil 1? Were they going to modernize it with the over-the-shoulder camera style that Resident Evil 4 had introduced over a decade ago? Or hell, were they going to go first person after the success of Resident Evil 7? These couple of years of being left in the dark was interesting to say the least. Resident Evil over the years has developed into a franchise with very different playstyles, and because of it, they segmented the fan base into different groups. So much so that many people have a very, well, I'll just say very excitable opinion on what the series should be like, even down to something as little as a camera perspective. You had people who were dead set against the game being anything more than a remake in the vein of the original, claiming that the perspective change would fundamentally change the core experience. Then you had people like me who were a bit more open to using OTS, feeling that no, stupid attachments to stuff like camera and tank control was not healthy, and that a survival horror game could easily be done in this style as long as it kept out the over-the-top elements and focus on horror. Then once Resident Evil hit the scene, there was worry if it was going to be in first person. Like, realistically, the Resident Evil fanbase is pretty similar to the Sonic fanbase, I find. It's been so fragmented over the years that you got so many views and opinions on the franchise that it made me wonder at points, will the Resident Evil 2 remake even do well with such a complicated fanbase? On top of Capcom's reception before these last couple of years, where many also thought, could they even deliver a competent title anymore? But in the end, I didn't care about these pointless debates. After seeing what they accomplished with Resident Evil 7, and how well they nailed the horror, I had faith that at the very least, I'd enjoy it as much as I did titles like the Revelation spin-off series. So all I cared about was, we do it. We did it. We asked, we begged, bitched, moaned, bartered, complained for over a decade, but it was finally a reality. And 3.5 years later, it's finally in our hands. Now, I know this was a pretty long intro, but I felt it was necessary to give some proper context and perspective on this remake and just how important it was to the series, because for a while, it honestly didn't feel like it was ever going to happen, but 17 years later, was the wait worth it? Let's find out. So when it comes to the Resident Evil 2 remake, it's a very different beast when compared to the original. That one was clearly trying to perfect the original as best as possible, which it did so successfully that it flat out replaced it. Resident Evil 2 Remake, on the other hand, decides to go the more reimagining style remake where many things felt familiar, but was a completely different experience. And I'm not just talking camera and control perspective. If you thought you were going to be able to go into this game and think you're going to be able to use your knowledge on Resident Evil 2 to guide you, well, not happening. It might feel familiar and share similar beats and set pieces, but the path to each familiar set piece is completely different, or has been changed completely where it doesn't even resemble its original source material like the sewers or the underground lab. Not to say that it doesn't capture the spirit of the original game, you're gonna see the familiar stuff that you've grown to love about the original. It's still Resident Evil 2, don't misconstrue that, as it's still faithful. It's just this is very much a new game and new experience as so many things have been remixed, and I love the game so much more because of it. So as you may know, the game stars Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie cop who just joined the Raccoon City Police Department where his first day just so happens to start during the outbreak. On his way to the city, he finds the other star of the game, Claire Redfield, at a gas station. She's on a search for her brother Chris, whom she's lost contact with for over a month, so she decided to go to Raccoon City to go find him. They soon get separated upon entering the city as an 18-wheeler almost takes him out, but soon they make it to the police station separately to find shelter and to find out what the hell is going on. Unfortunately, they find out the station is just as much a death trap as the city is. And it's also a pretty mysterious and puzzling building as well. Claire and Leon soon get saved by Marvin, then is tasked with finding a way out of the station. Along the way, they'll meet other survivors such as Ada Wong, a spy who says she's with the FBI who is looking for a sample of the G virus, the main cause of the outbreak, as well as Annette Birkin, wife of William Birkin who created said virus. You'll also stumble upon Sherry Birkin, a child that seems to be targeted by the mutated William and is in need of being saved. As Claire and Leon search and try to survive the outbreak, their journey takes them through mysteries that lead them to a conspiracy and the source of the outbreak itself. So in terms of story, if you've played the original, then you're gonna have a general idea of the events that go on, but many aspects of the story has been changed or remixed, where the idea is that point A and point B are the same, but how you get there is a much different story. And in my opinion, I think they did a really good job here. Anything that seemed hokey got overhauled so that it makes more sense and more believable, like Ada pretending to be an FBI agent this time, instead of just a civilian looking for her boyfriend. Or the remake just improves on these characters in general. There was a little bit of sadness when it was revealed that many of the original cast was being replaced, most people pointing towards Alison Court, the original voice of Claire, as the biggest loss since she played her for years. And while yes, it would have been cool to see her come back, I have no problem admitting, this new version of Claire is the best version we've seen to date, and this is the version I want to see come back moving forward. Same goes for Leon. In my opinion, this once again is the best Leon so far. Let's be real here. Even the most die-hard fans of this series could never say this overarching story and acting have been top-notch and actually mean it. You might come for its atmosphere, lore, world building, and the personality of these characters, but Resident Evil has never been no Metal Gear Solid. But this time, I was actually a lot more invested than I normally was. Even though I've known about the plot for a long time now, the retelling and remix of the story, as well as the talent they got to play these characters, were amazing. Like I said, this is the best Claire's ever been, and that's because for the first time, she really felt and acted like a 19-year-old college student. She's believable in her actions, how emotional she can get at times due to certain events. It felt real. And Stephanie Panicello, I think I'm saying that right? Claire's mocap and voice actress should be proud of this performance. Honestly, everyone should be, because they really were giving it their all and did an amazing job. For the first time in the series, I can say with a straight face there's a great story in a Resident Evil game. I mean, hell, when there's 2 cutscenes that hit me on an emotional level, you know you've done good. It also probably helps just how beautiful this game is with its gore. They really stumbled upon something with their in-house RE engine that was originally designed for Resident Evil 7. Even on my base PS4, the attention to detail is outstanding. From how the characters look, the environments, the gore. Jesus Christ, zombies never look so raw, decadent, and gory. Resident Evil 7 looked pretty, but after a while you could see the cracks in the techniques to cover up their tracks. But here, I mean, it could be a trick of the eye due to the camera, but everything here looks like Capcom has learned how to use this engine even better and get the most out of it. This also goes for its sound design. Resident Evil 2 this time around is going more for an ambience feel where the sounds of the environment is going to haunt you a bit more. Now, I'm no sound expert, but with headphones, ooh, it's a treat. Now, there is some music tracks, but besides boss encounters, they're pretty infrequent, which leads to them being a bit more forgettable. Not bad, but I'm certainly not going to be remembering any of them. But even still, the haunting sounds is effective and makes up for it. The nice thing is though, with the deluxe version, or if you pay for it separately, you're getting the best of both worlds as you can have the original soundtrack play too, which makes the music a bit more lively if you prefer to have some tunes playing like I do. You know, it's actually pretty amazing how well it still fits with this more gritty and realistic take of the game. It just goes to show how amazing this soundtrack was where 20 years later and it still holds up, can still enhance the experience. And this new level of attention and care goes for its gameplay as well. Best way to describe it to me is that it's classic Resident Evil with an over-the-shoulder perspective. No more, no less. You're gonna be running around the environments, searching for items to progress further, puzzles to solve, all the while fighting off zombies and other creatures who want to bite your face off. In terms of combat, if you played Resident Evil 4 or any game after that, then you're gonna feel right at home. Although there is a couple key differences. For one, we reverted back to 4 and 5's movement where either you're walking or you're basically doing a jog. It can feel a little sluggish at times, but for the more slower pace this game has, it works and is a lot more fitting. The other major change is no melee moves whatsoever. You're not going to be doing haymakers, net breakers, or suplexes anywhere in this game. The closest you'll get is using your knife to attack, which has its uses, mainly enemies on the ground, but outside of that, you and zombies are on nearly equal terms of deadliness. Speaking of the knife though, Resident Evil 2 Remake reintroduces the defense item concept from the original. Basically, if you have a knife on you or grenades or flash grenades, you can use it as a means to block an attack from an enemy that grabs you from the front. I'm so happy to see this element return and be expanded upon. In the original remake, it could be a lifesaver at points and just all around a neat concept. The problem with it was though, it felt a little off back then. You use special daggers or an item exclusive to either Chris or Jill, for example Chris's grenades. It was an interesting idea that a grenade could be used to save you from a bite, but it never made sense why you couldn't use it as an actual weapon. Like, you've got a grenade, dude, you know you can use it for offense too, right? Here though, you do get the option to use these 3 items either defensively or offensively. The great thing is though, it's a risk versus reward deal. You can use them as a means of escape, and oh, you will use them as such, but either the knife gets damaged and will break on you quicker, not to mention you can't use a knife attack unless you have another one or get it back from the enemy you stabbed, or your grenade won't be nearly as potent than it would be if you've thrown it instead. The thing I like is that it forces you to think a little bit, and fits the resource management element Resident Evil is known very well for. So your typical items make a return. You've got your first aid sprays, keys, and other progression items which you'll need to examine at points. Gunpowder makes a return from Resident Evil 3 that can be used to create different types of ammo based on the combination used. And lastly, herbs. In fact, blue herbs have been upgraded where if you mix it with red or a red plus green herb, it'll not only cure your poison status, but also make attacks on you less damaging for a short time. This was a very welcome upgrade since blue herbs always felt kinda gimmicky to me. They were always placed in areas right before you faced off against enemies that could poison you, so the poison status effect always felt kinda situational and pointless to me. Now, poison status is still very much a situational status effect since as far as I know only one enemy in the game can actually poison you, although more deadly since if you get hit once more before curing yourself you instantly die. But it's nice to see blue herbs get more purpose here. Stuff like this is nice to see, and it's little touches like that goes a long way, just like the new precision mechanic. Long gone are the days of having to stop and shoot. Ever since Mercenaries 3D, the main series has been able to move and shoot at the same time, a feature that no way would have ever been taken out. In fact, having the ability to move and shoot, as well as just being able to aim freely, has always been one of the biggest arguments against the OTS system working for a survival horror game, with many citing it as it would give the player too much of an advantage since you could aim for the enemy's weak spot every time. Thankfully, the game proves that theory wrong since enemies don't have an obvious spot that you want to aim at all the time. Sure, most games will teach you the head will be the only shot worth taking, but that's definitely not true here. You're gonna find out very quickly that even zombies aren't gonna go down easily with a few well-placed shots to the head. Many times you can unload an entire clip of handgun ammo into them, and they still might get back up. So it's not a guaranteed tactic. In fact, due to the game's dismemberment mechanic, I found myself shooting zombies in the leg more, forcing them to the ground so they become slower and easier to avoid. But that's not to say there isn't any merit for aiming for the head, as they included what at least I think is a new mechanic to the series where if you keep moving, your aiming reticle will enlarge, although you'll still be able to pull off headshots fairly easy. But if you pay attention to it, that reticle will shrink if you stop walking. By doing so, not only will you be able to pinpoint directly where you want to shoot, but as far as I know, it improves your critical hit rate too, which can make all the difference. So as far as I'm concerned, they found a great compromise between new and old that pays homage to its roots, but also lets the player make a decision on what's the best option for the situation, once again playing into the risk versus reward factor that's so synonymous with survival horror in the first place. Now, of course, not everything is a risk versus reward aspect. There is a progression system in this game where your character will grow as time goes on, and it's done through custom parts for your guns and RPD pouches, aka fanny packs. Now, these aren't new concepts for the Resident Evil games by any means, as they actually originated from the original Resident Evil 2, but as you've guessed, they've been expanded upon. Before, it was just handguns that could have been upgraded, but now every regular weapon has at least one upgrade, possibly 2 or 3. To me, this is how custom parts should be done. The Revelation series did have custom parts, so to speak, but it didn't feel impactful. Same with the shop in 4 and 5, they always felt like just minor upgrades. To be fair, I enjoyed it, but seeing your weapons essentially evolve and feel like substantial upgrades Army of 2 style is the best way in my opinion. Each one feels impactful, but the interesting thing is, you can take off the parts too, like Leon's Matilda 3 burst upgrade. It may be good for bosses, but it'll eat up ammo a lot quicker, so players might not always want it equipped. Another example why you might want to take off a part is because you're turning your weapon into a 2-slot item instead of just 1 slot. There's obviously some parts that you'll want on no matter what, but it gives the player options and choices, and more choices for a player is always going to be a good thing in my books. And then there's the fanny packs. Oh my god, I love these things. Again, it's not a new concept, but this time around you're getting a lot more than one upgrade. You start off with 8 inventory slots, but depending on the difficulty you play, you could end up with like 20 slots. At first I wondered if this was going to be too much where it makes the inventory system kind of pointless, but as I soon found out, no, it definitely didn't. Even with the inventory upgrades, it wasn't long before I was starting to run out of space even when I had double the slots. It's actually kind of surprising how needed these things actually are. Plus, I'm glad this was expanded upon because it helps cut down on the needless backtracking and helps keep the pacing up, I felt. You're still gonna feel the tension a bit of item management, especially on hardcore, but it doesn't feel like you gotta constantly go back and forth to the item box all the time. Nonetheless, I don't know about you, but one of the best feelings in any video game is seeing your character grow, and these two features were much appreciated. But to me, the element of progression I appreciated the most was the ability to memorize codes and puzzles for replays. We've all experienced this at one point or another. You decide to replay a game and you get to a part where you already know the solution, but because they don't want you to get something early, they'll force you to go and get the key or item that tells you what the code is. That shit's annoying when developers pull that crap, isn't it? Thankfully, Resident Evil 2 doesn't pull stupid stuff like that. Well, except for one custom part, but the point is you're incentivized to remember codes. And if you do, then you're gonna get some of those custom parts in fanny packs sooner than you regularly would, and helps heighten that sense of non-linearity. Now, to be fair, you're still gonna be going through the same set pieces each time in the same order. RPD first, then the sewers, and then the lab. But having this knowledge opens up the game just a bit more. And I know it's kind of a, well, no shit, stupid kind of moment, but so many games I've played in the past few years don't do this and instead restrict the player, so I felt it was needed to be pointed out. I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but it's the little things like this that add up. But speaking of codes and puzzles, there's actually a good amount of them this time around. If I had any complaints about the original Resident Evil 2, it was definitely lacking in the puzzle department, I felt. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about fetch quests, there's more than enough in that, but actual puzzles where you had to solve a problem with a solution. As great as the original was, nobody can deny it was short on puzzles, or at the very least, actual puzzles that challenged you. To me, I'd say this was easily one of the things that was improved the most in the remake. There was the electrical panel puzzles, the chess piece plug puzzles that really stumped me on the second run, the herbicide puzzle that was a bitch on the second run to figure out. You're gonna have to use your brain a little bit on these puzzles, and it's been a really long time to say that about a Resident Evil game, at least for me. Some people might have found them easy, but for me, I can gladly say I was temporarily stumped. But anyway, let's move on to the actual horror. So one of the first things I took notice of right away was just how dark the game was, like straight up. You're using a flashlight like 70% of the time, and I was cautious whether or not this was going to be an issue later down the road. And outside of some spots in the sewers, I'd say they made the right choice. It adds so much to the atmosphere where these locations finally feel creepy and unnerving. As much as I love this series, Resident Evil has never been known for being the scariest games out there, so while I might not have been spooked, the RPD feels lived in now. It feels like shit went down with the debris, blood, and zombies all over the place. Hell, I'll say it right now. Zombies in this game are probably the best they've ever been in the series, ever. Like I mentioned earlier, the attention to detail and the gore for these bastards are unreal. Every shot you make on them takes a chunk of flesh out of them, and after a few shots, you can take their limbs off, and they are bloody disgusting. Oh, I love it. On the way though, you'll be fighting more than just zombies, obviously. First off are the Lickers, who are annoying as hell as they usually are, until you learn about them being able to be stun locked with a knife. Still a creepy enemy nonetheless, and keep in mind you'll be dealing with them a bit more as Claire than you will be Leon. Next up, a series staple, the Cerebruses, aka zombie dogs. And oh my god, I hate these things. They are so annoying. But it's a good thing that I hate them so much because the dog enemy has appeared in so many games now in so many different forms over the years, it's not even funny. But they've kind of de-evolved from each game and went from a real threat all the way to mild annoyance. So it was a nice evil surprise to see how aggressive and vicious they were this time around. They're still glass cannons, but I'll take that over the duds we got in the last couple games any day. Then once you reach the sewers, you'll be greeted by a few monsters called the G-Mutants. These big bastards did originate from the original, but back then, you only fought one who acted as a mini-boss. In this remake, they might not be considered mini-bosses anymore, but they definitely still have the bulk and the ability to poison you like a mini-boss can. Sometimes though, they can feel a little too bulky in my opinion. Unless you're using flames or the spark shot, these motherfuckers will eat through your ammo. They also have the ability to hit you from a distance with their young, and it's damn near impossible to slip past them to avoid a fight sometimes. Oh, they're easily the most hated enemy for me. Once you finally reach the lab, the Plant 43s, or the Ivies as they're also called, have made a return as well, but they've gotten a pretty big redesign here. They resemble more humanoid creatures and are much more terrifying than the originals. Their gimmick is, unless you burn them to a crisp, they'll keep on getting back up after a while. And you don't want these guys grabbing onto you without a defense item, because it's an insta-kill otherwise. As for bosses, you still got your Birkin fights in his multiple stages. The first time you face off against him, he's fairly predictable, but what he lacks in tactics to attack you, he more than makes up for it in just raw power and speed. There's no more just being able to run away and take your time and start taking pot shots as the boss slowly approaches you. Even on standard difficulty, Birkin will be on your ass, where you'll only be able to take a couple shots and have to start moving again, and on hardcore, he'll usually outpace you. The second fight with him is in this little section where you gotta use this crane to knock him over to the side. I don't really care for this fight. I mean, I don't hate it, but I don't find it all that interesting either. All you do is push the button, wait for the crane to go back, then push the other button to make it swing forward, and have it crash into Birkin by staggering him so he doesn't move out of its impact site. I mean, I get what they were going for, but the arena is a little too small, which leads to cheap hits, and you're just playing the waiting game for most of it unless you plan on blowing a lot of ammo on him. Not that fun in my opinion. After that, you'll face off against him again, and to me this was straight up a Resident Evil 4 and 5 boss fight. But for how late in the game it is, that's not a bad thing. He has his weak spots in his eyes and you need to shoot him out. He takes a lot of punishment and doles it out too. And with like everything else in this game, he's aggressive. In my opinion, this is Birkin's best fight. After that, Claire gets to deal with him one more time with a Gatling gun, and you have to shoot out his constantly regrowing eyes. I think this fight was fun, but realistically it isn't as in-depth as the previous fight. He just does the same 3 moves over and over until he's dead. And I also found him a lot easier to avoid. Again, it's a fun fight, but I think this has more to do with the Gatling gun than Birkin himself. As for Leon, he'll fight the first 3 Birkin fights as well, and at one point you'll have to face off against a giant alligator, which is just as unbelievably short as the original, but still an awesome return and great fan service. But the biggest and most intimidating force you'll be facing off against is the Tyrant, aka Mr. X. Oh my god, did you get an upgrade, didn't you, buddy? In the original, Mr. X would appear in the B scenario. A cutscene would play that made you think, oh shit, what the hell is that? He was not in the first time I played this. Shortly after, you would turn the corner and then BAM! He's there to make you shit your pants. And then you run away into a different room, and then after a while, you realize the guy only appears a few times and you can just ignore him until the end where you're forced to fight him. Not as intimidating once you realize that. But Mr. X gains that sexy fedora and is granted the ability to stalk your ass. Early in the game, you'll learn that zombies can slowly but eventually break through closed doors, which adds a bit of tension. Mr. X can obviously do that as well, but he is relentless. I'm saying it right now, he was the best part of this game to me hands down. At launch, Mr. X was the talk of the town. Either people loved these parts when he appeared, or they fucking despised it. Whatever side of the fence you stand on, it's not hard to see why there was such a buzz around him. Similar to Jack Baker in Resident Evil 7, Mr. X is an unstoppable force that'll continuously stalk and search for you throughout the station until you get to a new section of the game. But in my opinion, I feel the Tyrant was a lot better here. For one, he hangs around a lot longer. Until you leave the RPD, he's sticking around and there's no way of killing him. The most you'll be capable of is staggering him for about 30 seconds. To me, what makes him so effective is a couple things. For one, you hear this huge fucker stomping with every step. Even if you're in a different room, just knowing that he's close can be so intense on the first couple playthroughs. The other element I really enjoy about him is that how he searches for you is actually pretty realistic as it's sound-based. You might find a clue about lickers using sound to find their prey, but I feel Mr. X used that element to the best of its ability as it actually taught me that sounds do matter in Resident Evil 2. As long as you're not in his line of sight, he doesn't know where you are and you could potentially slip past him. But I of course didn't know that at first. If anything, I figured he's just gonna know where you are regardless whether he sees you or not. And at first, that's exactly how it seemed. For a while, I just ran everywhere, and he usually always found me, just constantly stomping and staring down at me like he was letting me know that I don't need to run. I'm gonna get you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But then I ran into the weapons room, figuring I could use the loop to slip past him so I could use the save room to catch my breath and plan ahead a bit. So I waited, just hearing those boot clicks getting closer and closer, expecting him to open up the door. Except, he didn't. In fact, I saw him walk right past the door through the open slits that acted as a window, and I was like, holy shit! Just almost shit my pants, but also thinking, this is fucking amazing. He doesn't know where I am. And right there, I became a fan of this mechanic instantly. To be fair, after a few more playthroughs, it comes apparent pretty quickly just how exploitable he can be. Once you learn how Mr. X works, he shouldn't ever be able to hurt you since you can always outrun him even if he does his power walk. The only time he's a real threat is if he's blocking your path, or he forces you into a room with other enemies, which can be devastating. So this has led to people who don't like him saying that he isn't hard, just annoying, which I get that mindset. I'm sure speedrunners despise him. And if you don't like these portions to the game, fair enough. But to me, I say yes, he can be annoying, but that's the point. He's that random element that throws a monkey wrench into your plans and forces you to rethink things and put pressure on the player. For me, it makes me giddy to think about. If they did this for Mr. X, then what could they do for Nemesis in a remake of Resident Evil 3? Now that will be terrifying. Now, Claire will have to deal with him too at points, but he's much more prevalent in Leon's story as he pops up a couple more times outside of the RPD sections, and he also serves as the final boss for Leon's campaign, and he's definitely a lot more satisfying than Birkenswarth's stage. He's quick, he'll send you flying with each attack, and he has an insta-kill, which I normally don't care for in video games, but for a final boss it's pretty fitting. Plus, it's highly telegraphed, so as long as you have bullets, you'll stop him easily. And the payoff of finally taking that guy down is so goddamn satisfying. Oh! Yeah! Can you tell at this point just how much I love this guy yet? Because Mr. X is fucking awesome in Resident Evil 2. So I guess it's finally time to talk about the campaigns themselves a little bit, what the differences are between Leon and Claire. For story progression, there is some differences, but not too much. Just enough for both to feel somewhat unique, such as exclusive areas, specific key items like the heart key for Claire and the club key for Leon, different final bosses, and each has their, I guess, partner character. Ada Wong, a spy who pretends to be the FBI that ends up using Leon for her goals to require a sample of the G virus, and Sherry Birkin, a child Claire stumbles upon and starts to help to try and protect her from all the dangers. Specifically her father, William Birkin, who, as previously stated, you'll come across and have to fight multiple times. But other than that, Claire and Leon are going to do the same things and go through the same areas and solve the same kind of puzzles. In terms of physical differences, unlike some games where the characters have strengths and weaknesses, that doesn't really happen in this game. The only real difference between the two are the guns they can get, and that's going to make up the difference in terms of gameplay style. Leon, I would say, is the more traditional loadout. He starts out with the Matilda, a standard handgun that can eventually be upgraded to a 3-shot burst. Soon after, he'll gain access to the shotgun, magnum, and then flamethrower. Claire, on the other hand, is definitely a bit more unorthodox. She starts out with a revolver that definitely feels like a downgrade from Leon's starting weapon, as it only holds 5 shots and takes a bit to reload until you get an upgrade. Shortly after, Claire will find the grenade launcher with flame rounds, and she can craft acid rounds too. Then she'll find a new handgun that'll replace a revolver, which to me is the best handgun in the game because it comes with that sexy laser sight, and ooh, was it nice to get that back. I just wish the other guns could have it too. She also gets the machine gun fairly early, which I found to be the most useful on bosses. Then once you reach the sewers, you'll find custom parts that essentially turn her revolver into a magnum, and then lastly the spark shot. Basically a semi-ranged taser that'll halt enemies in place, and after a set amount of time, will cause an internal explosive shock that fries most enemies in one shot. So I'm sure some people are wondering though, well, who's got the better loadout? And it may be a little deceiving. At first glance, many may feel Leon has a better loadout, as his starting weapon is better, and his shotgun and magnum can explode zombie heads like it's nothing. So based on that, some may feel Leon is better, but if you keep playing, you soon realize that Leon doesn't have the better weapons. He just has better accuracy and a critical hit rate, which is only really taken into account for zombies. Now to be fair, zombies take up the bulk of the enemies you'll face in the game, but other than Ivy's thanks to his flamethrower, Leon's gonna struggle with everything else. Claire, on the other hand, may have a bit of a harder time with zombies since she can't get guaranteed criticals to pop those zombie heads off, but she more than makes up for it by making quick work of the lickers, G sewer monsters, and the Ivies. It's laughable just how badly a flame round will decimate a licker, or the spark shot 1 or 2-shotting the G sewer monsters, and not to mention just how satisfying it is to make them squirm like that. Yeah, fuck you. So if I had to pick who I liked playing as more, then it would definitely be Claire. Not just because she's my favorite character in Resident Evil, but just a total badass in the game thanks to her awesome weapons. But other than that, you just gotta beat the game. In doing so, you'll unlock classic costumes for Leon and Claire, as well as a mode called Second Run. Basically, you get to play from the perspective of the character who showed up later at the RPD. It's a slightly harder version that's essentially a range mode. Some items are in different spots, you access the RPD from a different point, forcing you to explore it differently. Specific progression puzzles have a different solution and are generally harder. You start off with a second handgun exclusive to the Second Run that takes different bullets from the standard handgun. Leon gets the M19, whereas Claire gets another revolver called the Quick Draw Army. And there also seems to be less ammo, and I mean, this all could be in my head, but enemies seem to be a little bit more resilient to gunshots. Not to mention that there seems to be more of them. Zombies will break through the windows in the RPD a lot quicker, and Mr. X shows up a hell of a lot sooner too. Beat the game again with the other character, and then that's where you're most likely going to start going after the unlockables. Say what you want about Resident Evil as a whole, but if there's one thing the series has always been phenomenal with, is its replayability and its rewards for being good at the game, and Resident Evil 2 Remake is no exception. Once you beat the game with both Claire and Leon, you'll unlock a mode called Fourth Survivor. It's a short canon story that stars everybody's masked mercenary, Hunk, as this is a recreation of his debut appearance where you have to guide him through the sewers to outside of the RPD, fending off and getting past an absurd amount of enemies that want him dead. If you're able to beat the Fourth Survivor, then you'll unlock the Tofu Survivor, another returning mode from the original where you play as the same section as Hunk did, but as a giant piece of tofu. The catch is, he only has knives and a couple herbs, making it a hell of a lot harder to complete. But if you somehow manage to beat Tofu Survivor, then you unlock 2 more types of tofu, konjac and uriro mochi, each with their own loadouts. Beat it again with one of them, then you'll unlock 2 more, Anin Tofu and Flan, again each with their own weapon loadouts. It's ridiculous, but amazing that they decided to do 5 of them instead of just 1, and definitely adds more replay value to Tofu Survivor. But that was just the bonus modes. If you played well in the story mode, then you'll get some goodies there too. First is the better combat knife if you manage to shoot all 15 Mr. Raccoon figures, this game's side collectible. It works like any other knife except it won't degrade over time, so you could always have a permanent knife on you. Now you can lose it if you don't get it back from the enemy you stab, but it's a nice little reward for not much effort. Although the next unlockables will take some effort. You can unlock the Samurai Edge edge with infinity ammo by getting an S rank on standard, as well as the LE5 machine gun on hardcore with an S rank. But of course, Capcom are sadistic little bastards, and decided to include 2 more unlimited ammo weapons, the Infinity Gatling gun and rocket launcher. These are definitely not for the faint of heart to unlock, as they'll test your skills since you need to get an S plus rank on hardcore for either run. To get an S plus rank, you've got to beat the game in under 2.5 hours on your first run, or 2 hours for the second run, which I'd suggest doing this on first run, mind you. Next, you can't use any unlimited ammo guns, though the Infinity Knife is fair game. And the last requirement? You can only save the game 3 times. And on hardcore, there's no autosaving, meaning you have to space out your lives, and if you die, you're gonna most likely replay in a large chunk of the game. Oh, and not to mention if you want both weapons, you're gonna be doing it with each character. Fun, eh? I managed to do it, but oh, there were some parts where I was telling Birkin and Mr. X to go fuck his head in those last fights. But I managed to do it. You may have to force yourself to restart a couple times, but you'll manage to succeed with enough patience, and the rewards are worth it. Being able to send zombies flying through the air just feels so goddamn good, and making Mr. X your bitch with that Gatling gun, riddling him full of bullets is food for the soul, man. Fuck you and your stupid fucking insta-kills.
Yeah.
Like, look at his face here, you can just read his thoughts.
I am Mr. X. I do not appreciate this humiliation. This is ridiculous. Stop this at once. Why are my eyes bulging out of my face? This doesn't look healthy.
So with how much praise I've given the game so far, you think it's pretty much perfect. And I mean, I deeply enjoyed the game. I mean, I must have if I platinumed it in about 4 or 5 days, but no game is perfect, and unfortunately, there are some issues. And just some weird omissions, too. First thing I wanted to bring out was more of a personal nitpick that I will admit is completely subjective, but for me I felt was kind of unnecessary, and that is the real-time difficulty scaling. This is a concept that has been around since Resident Evil 4, and basically what it does is scales how hard the enemies will be to fight and defeat a little bit. If you tend to take more hits and have trouble aiming, then the enemies in the game tend to go down a little bit easier. But if you're constantly hitting your mark, especially headshots, and not getting hit, then they're gonna get a little bit more aggressive and beefier. I understand why they included a mechanic like this, so that the game doesn't get brain dead easy, but in my opinion, it just punishes skilled gameplay. If I'm that good at the game, then let me feel that experience, you know? It's just like rubber banding in racing games, where they'll never let you have a decent lead even though you've earned the right to feel that superior over the computer. Oh, you've got that much of a lead? Well, fuck that shit. You guys in the back to get a free boost. Ugh. Again, this is completely subjective as many people may actually enjoy this mechanic, and they have every right to. I just feel hardcore and making the enemies beefy to begin with is more than enough. I will say this though, there should never be a time where I can unload almost 2 clips of handgun ammo into the head of a zombie and they still get up. That gets a little ridiculous at times. Now again, I know some will consider this a nitpick, and I won't blame you if you do. That's why I'm making it clear here that this is a subjective criticism. But legit problems with the game that to me aren't subjective is the Sherry and Ada sections. Well, one more than the other, but let me explain. I didn't really bring this up, but at certain points, you'll take control of both Sherry and Ada, where you'll have to go through a portion of the game with their own gimmick to break up the action. Now, to the game's credit, these sections were a lot more expanded on, and much more interesting than they were in the original, since back then nothing really changed in gameplay. You just played as them for a short time and collect a couple items. So I've got to be fair and acknowledge that Ada and Sherry were upgraded and much more interesting here. For Sherry, you have to try and escape Chief Irons from the orphanage, and you're basically playing a scripted game of hide and seek. It was great the first time I played through it as it felt tense, but it was only tense the first playthrough. Sherry's segment unfortunately suffers from once you experience it the first time and know the solution, it just becomes mind-numbingly easy and you're just going through the motions on repeat playthroughs. It's a shame because I feel they could have done more with it. Maybe randomize the hiding places and layout a bit. I don't know. It's harmless, but I'm just on autopilot here. Ada's section is better. Her gimmick is that she can use an EMF reader to hack into electrical stuff, and have it work for her as she sees fit, all the while dodging and fighting enemies, and even has to deal with Mr. X for a little bit. It's an interesting gimmick and it's kind of a cool puzzle element, but it doesn't take any real thinking. You just have to search for the stuff that you can hack and scan at once. That's it. Again, an interesting idea, but unfortunately it's over before it really starts to take off. And it just left me thinking like, that's it? Really? This feels like there's more to it. And as data miners have discovered, there is an unused mode called Ada the Spy, which is either future DLC or was a scrapped Ada scenario. I hope it's future DLC because it just feels like there's so much more they could do with this hacking mechanic in more interesting ways. So just have to wait and see, I guess. When it comes to the Fourth Survivor and Tofu Survivor, for the most part I actually enjoyed quite a bit. It's action-packed and can feel like a rush slipping past zombies and blowing their heads off. But there is one section that I just feel was completely cheap. It's when you finally get outside at the very last section of the game. at this point you're probably running low on supplies, or just have enough to get through the last part. Problem I have is that who thought it was a good fucking idea to flood the final section with like 20 different enemies, one of them being able to poison you and two that can insta-kill you, as well as having Mr. X breathing down your neck, forcing you to just charge in and hope for the best? Oh, fuck me, man. It's not so bad with Hunk since he's usually given just enough supplies to deal with it and bum rush it, but that's not always the case. And even if you still have health and defense supplies, it's still a crapshoot. Cause one thing I despise in games is when you can get stun locked, and oh boy do they love to just stun lock grab you here, which can be the end of a run right there. But even if you do luck out and get away, chances are the camera moves on you and you end up getting disoriented by their grabs and can't see where the hell you're going. Quite a few attempts ended because I ended up going backwards for fuck's sakes. I don't know, I've beaten it obviously, but I didn't feel accomplished the first few times due to that part. So lastly, I guess it's time to talk about the stuff that didn't make the transition from the original to the remake. First off, some of the enemies didn't return. Evolved lickers, the giant moth, giant spiders, and crows didn't make the cut. The giant moth and crows didn't really need to come back. I mean, there was only one moth who was supposed to be a mini-boss that went down before it could even move, and crows literally appeared in only one room. Devastating loss right there, I tell you that much. What the hell were those Capcom clowns thinking, you bastards? My fucking crows. But in all seriousness, the loss of evolved lickers and spiders definitely do sting a bit, and would have given the game a little bit more enemy variety. We also lost Extreme Battle Mode, Resident Evil 2's main arcade-like mode, similar to the Mercenaries and Raid mode in future games, where you'd pick between one of 4 characters each with their own loadout, and you'd travel through a more action-packed version of the environments. Pretty similar to 4th Survivor, just more in-depth with different difficulties and options. I suppose Ghost Survivors is its replacement. Now keep in mind, these are free DLC and in no way detract from the main game or my final verdict, as you can just skip them. But I'm still gonna give my opinion on them, and oh man, these are such a letdown. Before the game was released, it was announced that there would be a mode coming where you played as characters who didn't survive the outbreak in what-if scenarios. That would explore the lore of Resident Evil 2 a bit more. This sounded really cool at first, but after playing them, they're definitely not that. Considering that it was free, I wasn't expecting much to begin with, but free or not, Ghost Survivor so far is one of the weakest bonus modes in the series in my opinion. When I say what-if stories, that's being very generous. It's just 6 or so movie stills for each mission. The rest is just gunplay with not even any real dialogue during gameplay. It's essentially more 4th Survivor-like stages, that are a lot more gimmicky with different locations and a new enemy type thrown in each one, which isn't a problem in its own right. Again, for free content on what-if stories, I wasn't expecting Lost in Nightmares or Not a Hero quality here. But the reason why I don't really care for Ghost Survivors was 2 things. One, I feel it's too hard for its own good. You know, I'm a veteran of Resident Evil games. I've platinumed this game and got S+ ranks to get the Gatling gun and rocket launcher for Christ's sakes, and I was still seeing that "you are dead" scream many times. I like challenge, but there's a cutoff point for me, and that cutoff point is when challenge just becomes difficult. The difference between the two, I feel, is a challenge can be hard, but you're still given the tools to go about the challenge you see fit on how you approach it. Difficulty, on the other hand, to me just feels restrictive, which these missions have in spades. It's more action-oriented, but your characters are very limited in resources. So in many cases, you're going to be forced to just try and dodge the creatures and go through the sections of the game each time in a very specific way, all the while praying you have RNG on your side. They do give you items along the way, such as backpacks or vending machines, but those vending machines are fucking evil. You get to pick one of 3 items, but pick the wrong one and it could potentially screw over your run. That's how restrictive it can be in completing it. I'd say the worst one to do this was Runaway. Ironically, the supposedly easiest one was the mission that gave me the most crap. In this mission, they introduced a new enemy called the Paleheads, basically fast and erratic zombies that can regenerate quickly and can only be taken down with strong weapons. This mission also loves to throw dogs and lickers at you too, alongside a fuck ton of zombies, and this is your starting loadout. How well do you think these attempts are gonna go? Well, let me tell you, it resulted in a lot of screaming and telling my game to go fuck itself. It also highlights an issue this mode loves to do, and that's lock certain doors after you pass through them. Like here, I was hoping to lead a Palehead in here and run around the table to avoid him so I can save on ammo, but nope, can't have players doing that. That makes too much fucking sense. Oh, you fucking cocksuckers. Whoever thought locking doors was a good idea can go to hell. End of story. To be fair, Kendo wasn't too bad, as his mission just introduces poison zombies which can explode in poisonous gas if you kill them, so you just had to take your time, and Ghost was surprisingly the easiest one I felt. Just make sure you pick up that handgun in the vending machine. If you don't, then you might as well just quit the run right there. No Way Out though, while I really liked it at first, I ended up hating it by the end, because it's essentially a horde mode where the goal is to kill 100 zombies in increasingly harder waves. But near the end they decide to throw in so many paleheads that it just comes off as cheap, because if you don't have the weapons to deal with them, then your starting handgun isn't going to do fuck all to them, essentially killing your run. It's a shame because I could see a lot of potential with a mode like this, where you have a couple maps, being able to pick your character with specific loadouts, mercenary style. Oh my god, it could be so much fun. Just don't screw the player over with too many of those goddamn paleheads at the end. It's bullshit. But in the end, the biggest problem about these modes I felt are that they are just forced survivor-like missions. But the difference is you're not equipped to deal with the onslaught of enemies like Hunk or certain Tofus are. Hunk has more resources to combat the unreal amount of creatures, so I feel more reason to come back to Force Survivor as I can try out different strategies increasing the replayability more. Now, there is a training difficulty in Ghost Survivors that's supposedly meant to help teach the player the layout of the level, but that's bullshit because training has less enemies in it, so how the hell are you supposed to prepare for that? It's just a mess all around. Ironically, I find training to be more fun since you're given more resources to fight off the outbreak, but the enemies become so mind-numbingly easy and docile that it feels shallow, like you just can't fucking win in this mode. Either it's too hard or it's too fucking easy. Once you beat it the first time, maybe outside of No Way Out, it doesn't have the staying power that even the Force Survivor has, which leads to the other reason why Ghost Survivors disappointed me. It just reminded me of Raid and Extreme Battle Mode and how much fun it would be in this game. Hell, the pieces are already there for it. Multiple characters, stages with 2 difficulties. It has an arcade feel. I mean, even the gold padlocks make a return. All that's missing is weapon customization and a leveling system. So hopefully we'll get something like that in the future, but for now, I doubt I'll be coming back to Ghost Survivors much. I have no interest in getting my face constantly bitten off due to a lack of resources in an action-oriented mode. Again, I know it's free content, and like I said earlier, you can't ignore it, but I've got to review it. And I think it just irks and disappoints me more than it normally would, is because I know something awesome could be done here, but I fear Capcom won't capitalize on it, and all we're left is a mode that is a huge step back from Extreme Battle Mode. And when something from the original is better than the remake, well, you fucked up, and you fucked up big time. Lastly, and back to the main game, which also follows this point of the original doing it better, to me the one thing that didn't make the transition to this remake that hurts it the most is the zapping system. The original Resident Evil 2 is pretty famous for its Game A and B scenarios where certain things you did in Game A would affect Game B, such as using the cord to close the metal shutters from letting more zombies into the police station, whether you killed Marvin or not when he changes into a zombie, certain items you pick up, etc. It was a pretty awesome mechanic that made you think about your actions since you were essentially deciding whether you were going to make Game B harder or not. Unfortunately, the remake doesn't retain this mechanic. Sure, second run is supposed to act like the Game B scenario, but everything's predetermined. First run can't influence the second run whatsoever, which means it's really in a range mode pretending to be the Game B scenario. But I have a feeling second run was a late addition because not only was it originally stated that there wasn't going to be any form of A-B scenarios, but the other reason is the beginning of the second run just doesn't feel right. It doesn't take place at the car crash like the first run. No, you literally start outside the station and meet up with Claire and Leon the first time right away. Yet we know that whoever you play as in the first run has been there for a little while, so there's like a 10 to 20 minute gap missing there. So clearly something was off and they couldn't add the zapping mechanic in time. Or not, because I'm just theorizing, because it certainly couldn't be because they don't know how to do the zapping mechanic in this day and age when Revelations 2 already brought it back. I don't know, it's weird. Maybe in a year or so these things will be fixed, but for as much as I adore this remake, for me to brush this stuff off wouldn't be right. But there you have it, that's my very in-depth look at Resident Evil 2 Remake, and my final verdict is, it's phenomenal. This was exactly the kind of remake I was looking for. A modern take on the beloved classic that improves on so many things, that honestly I might still be in that honeymoon period with the game, but for Resident Evil 2 Remake, it may very well be my favorite game in the series now. For me, it's that good. From its atmosphere to gameplay and story, so many elements feel like such a major improvement. Hell, there wasn't even really any bugs, just some uncommon frame rate stutters. But that's about it. When's the last time you've been able to say that about a non-AAA Nintendo game? And the biggest thing is, it does all of this in a way that doesn't make the original obsolete. There is just as much reason to go back to the original as there is this remake. They might share the same name and familiar elements, but now we have 2 different versions of it. To me, that's the most impressive part. The fact that I can still come back to the original for more than just nostalgia is amazing to me. You know, I'll gladly take remakes that flat out replace the original too, but there's something special to be said when a remake is able to stand on its own 2 feet separate from the original, and also does what it needs to be a proper remake. It's not perfect as some things were lost in translation, but no game ever is. As you can tell, I love this game. And you know what, it's actually quite the contrast from the past Resident Evil games, where the only thing that's been able to keep me coming back are its bonus modes. So it kinda just goes to tell you how good the actual main game is. And I just want that Resident Evil 3 remake that much more. It better happen after how well this game did. Just better. But I guess it's time to... I think I better just wrap this up now. This is easily my longest review video I've ever done. But you know what? A game like this definitely deserved it, and I had a lot of fun really going into depth with this stuff. But until next time, you guys have a good one. Take care, have a good night, good day, whenever the hell you watch this. I'll catch you in the next one.